Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, you got it. Everybody seeing our first slide here? Big thumbs up. Yes.
I can see it.
Awesome. All right. Hey, everybody. So first of all, I just want to mention that Amanda vetoed my working title of Project Management Essentials for Fledgling Project Managers and those who don't necessarily identify as a project manager. She was probably right on that one. I guess we'll never know. In any case, here's Echo. We were founded in 2019, in case you didn't know. We're coming up on our 5-year anniversary this summer, by the way. Some of our core services include, but certainly aren't limited to, work management solutions, process automation, data visualization, PMO solutions, not to mention coaching and facilitation for change management, strategic planning. We do workshops. We're all over the place. You get it. I'll also mention that we're technology agnostic, so we're never motivated to sell you on any particular solution or tool. Our order of operations always begins with understanding your business and their particular needs. So whatever those happen to be, we meet you where you are. This is me. I'm Jason. I've been a certified project management professional since 2017. I have a Master of Science in Project Management Operations. That's a real thing, I promise. I have an MBA, and I'm a general PM nerd and all-around nice guy. So, rules of engagement. Don't be afraid to come off mute, send comments, or just sit back. Follow your heart. Do what you want to do. Agenda. We're going to talk about PM stuff. If you came to talk about PM stuff, you're in the right place. If you didn't come to talk about PM stuff, stick around. We'll have fun. So I brought this slide up because I'm always personally interested in how people organize their thoughts, whether it be in a meeting or, getting ready for a webinar. So in preparation for this webinar, I created this mood board to help gather and prioritize my thoughts. Anybody out there have a secret special way they get ready for this kind of thing? If not,
whiteboard all the way, Jason. Whiteboard and stickies, analog.
Surprise, Molly uses a whiteboard. All right, moving right into it. So let's get into the meat of why we're here. What is a project? Well, a project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product or service or result. Is the answer you would choose if you were sitting for the PMP exam. Any aspiring or current PMs will be intimately familiar with this definition and understand why the words temporary and unique are underlined. The word temporary means projects must have a defined beginning and end. This means every project must include a timeline, scope, and resources. So the fact that it's temporary with a beginning and an end also means that it's not part of ongoing operations. This brings us to the second point. The purpose of a project must be to create a unique product, service, or result, just like we went over. This means a project will be started in order to accomplish a specific goal that is typically outside the realm of day-to-day operations. That means that the project team might include people who don't usually work together and require resources that are typically outside the scope of day-to-day operations. Every project's going to have the following components. A goal. What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to do? A timeline. When are we trying to achieve it? When's our deadline? A budget. How much is it going to cost to do this thing? And then stakeholders. Who has interest or skin in the game? So by definition, a project is not something routine. Day-to-day operations and maintenance aren't considered projects that because they don't have a definitive start and end. Any questions there? Great. All right. So as we talk about operations project management, it's easy to get confused when we start talking about project management operations, especially when we talk about both in the conversation, which happens a lot. So let's go back to the definition. Temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. Operations, however, constitute an organization's ongoing repetitive activities, such as accounting or production, you fill in the blank. The keep the lights on type of stuff. I know if my friend June were here, June Shen Epstein, she's not on this call, is she? Amanda? No. Probably better if she's not. I'm just going to paraphrase her. She'd say What about operational projects, Jason? To which I'd reply, of course, June, we know that operational projects are focused on improving businesses' day-to-day operations, where the objective is modifying a process in a way that directly supports business goals. So any projects that aim to increase efficiency, decrease costs, or improve productivity in the short term can be considered operational projects. So that is definitely a thing. An example of that would be outsourcing of a product. If you guys have any examples, feel free to chime in. Um, so product creation, manufacturing, that's typically operational. But if you had to outsource it, there's going to have to be a definitive beginning and end date, going back to that definition of that project, where we're going to outsource that project. All right. Project managers. You can probably see I don't put a whole lot of stock in or effort into my slides. I feel it's more about the content and conversation. So project managers, I think I can confidently say that most humans that I've met in my life are all PMs, at least to some degree, whether they want to admit it or not. So PMs are managers who manage projects. If you came here to be enlightened, that last bit was probably disappointing. But when we think about professional project managers, whether it be in the tech industry, they could be wrangling an ERP implementation. Like any other profession, there are skills both inherent and learned. So hard and soft skills that can make a good or not so great project manager. The hard skills that immediately come to mind probably won't be surprising to anybody. Things like being able to negotiate, good writing and speaking skills, being able to articulate yourself effectively can come in handy. Being organized, having a good concept of budgeting, not just financially, but resource planning and general allocation as well. Being able and willing to delegate. That's all I got off the top of my head. So soft skills that'll help a PM be successful are more in line with things like adaptability, resourcefulness, possessing influence and leadership skills and traits is always nice. You need to be an excellent communicator. In fact, communicating is where the lion's share of the professional PM's time and energy is spent. Critical thinking, unflappability. I always like to use that word whenever I can. Unflappability. It's just fun to say. Sense of humor is always good. So everything kind of like along those lines. All right. So history of project management. Let's talk about the evolution for just a minute, if you'll indulge me. So if we start all the way to the left, the Egyptian pyramids and the Great Wall of China. So around 200 BC-ish, China's first emperor, Qixin Huang, who'd been credited with uniting the various Chinese kingdoms, ordered literally millions of people to work on what is now the Great Wall of China. A lesser known fact is that he separated his resource pools into three distinct groups: troops, citizens, and criminals. So, resource management, allocation, all that kind of stuff. As we move forward down the line in the early 20th century, we got some pretty cool stuff. A guy named Henry Gantt gifted us all with the Gantt chart. And that is exactly why autocorrect always wants to capitalize the word Gantt, because it's named after that guy. The critical path method, which is a technique used to identify sequences of activities that must be done in order to complete a project on time. It ends up being something of a flow diagram that outlines durations and time constraints critical to delivering that thing exactly when you say you're going to deliver it. Later on, we see that the formation of the Project Management Institute came about, and that essentially began to recognize and formalize the PM profession. Then we see methodologies begin to spring up like weeds, and here we are today, which brings us right into our bit about methodologies. So, methodologies, or ways of managing project management. There's an ever-increasing number of these things that are flying around, like hybrid, Scrum, Kanban, Scrumban, critical path. Lean, Prince2, Prism, Rad. It goes on and on and on. And each has their own culture. I meant to say culture. Um, they also have like their own strengths and weaknesses based on any given situation. But when we boil it down, for most of us, there are two that see to the top. Any guesses out there about what the two primary methodologies are? That's right. Waterfall and Agile. So waterfall, or what's typically considered the traditional approach to project management, is one that most of us are familiar with or have direct experience with. Simply put, waterfall is sequential and divided into distinct phases. So these phases can be called or named whatever happens to work for your process. But typically the themes generally run from initiation, planning, executing, and ultimately closing out the project. This slide does a pretty decent job of illustrating how effort and time interrelate over the duration of any given waterfall project. So this one boils it down a little bit more. It's representing software development, but think about building a house for a minute. So first, you're going to want to lay out the requirements. What do I want? What do I need? Then you design it. Then you build it. Then you hand it over to the new happy owners. This is a great way of working if you have a well-established outcome from the beginning, but flexibility in the overall plan is generally pretty low, and moving from one phase to the next requires doing it all in a very specific order. Uh, Whereas Agile is a different beast altogether. It was originally conceived as a response to the rigid structure that the traditional or waterfall way of doing things gave us. So very unlike building a house, software development requires a more fluid way of delivering value. Just think of how fast technology evolves these days. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to plan in a long, drawn-out linear fashion instead of excuse me, instead of handing over the keys to the castle at like the end of a project, you end up, opening up different rooms in that castle. So based on immediate needs and requirements, eventually you'll get the whole castle, but sometimes you just need one or two kick-ass rooms to start making meaningful progress. Also, I'll say that Agile leaves the door open constantly to feedback and iteration, unlike Waterfall. So that's great in the software realm, but you'd probably never get that house built if you stopped every couple of days to get feedback and pivot on the way that you're doing things. Any comments out there? Agile, Waterfall, hit the mark.
Jason, I've got a question, if you don't mind indulging me for a moment. If you don't mind going back to the Agile diagram for a second. So the house metaphor I really appreciate. And one of the things that I'm curious about is kind of like learning about project management myself is just, does that kind of pause to check in for feedback and iterative, different elements of that, does that slow down the process? Like, is there kind of a pro or a con to Agile versus Waterfall in terms of like timing and just kind of whatever comes up for you with that question, I would be curious to hear.
For sure. That's a great question. And I would say it all depends on what you're trying to deliver. So if you're building a house, you know exactly what you're building. So it makes sense to have, we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and then you get your house. When we think about software development and knowing what we know about technology, and it's moving so fast, and we change our mind, and we just want to add features. Sometimes there's features that we want to add in that didn't even occur to us at the beginning of the project. So that's what Agile is really all about. It's about taking this big chunk that's this deliverable and really slicing it up into meaningful pieces. So you'll say, I want to build a landing page, and this is how I want it to work. So instead of saying we want to build the whole website with the landing page and the support page and what have you, we're going to focus on the landing page and we're going to deliver that. And then you can go through iterations and then focus on the next thing. Did that help?
Yeah, that's definitely helpful, Jason. I just, something that comes up for me sometimes is like, both of these concepts have a little bit of design in them, right? There's like build and design phases. And so sometimes Agile feels like a very design oriented approach, but I guess I can see how both are beneficial in like you're building the thing as opposed to like you're figuring it out as you go, or you're developing that process. And I also want to throw in there too, I see a comment from Molly, and if you want to chime in, Molly, definitely I would say feel free also. But that is helpful to me. It's nice to kind of parse out these different methods.
Yeah, I think that definitely Agile has that history in software development, and there are pros and cons, I think, if you don't mind me saying, Jason. So when you're doing multiple releases and you're trying to get to a point of ready to go live or production or add value, there is effort in getting to that point with the releases, right? That you could consider to be extra effort, right? But if you do a really big bang release where you're doing like a big chunk of development before trying, packaging it up and going live, it's much harder to unravel and it's more complex and there's more variables to it. So it really kind of depends. And what I would just say is that it depends on the process. It depends on what you're trying to create, making those decisions. And oftentimes it depends on the culture of the organization and the relationship that you have with the end users and the client, where you are in a maturity basis in the organization on which one actually makes the most sense. So sometimes the way that an individual team best works might not work for the larger organization or for the end users. And like all of those different components come into what works best. From a project manager standpoint, oftentimes in project manager, you're kind of given a little bit of like what is expected and like what that process is. And then in some cases, you're a project manager that's not really a project manager. You don't have authority and you're kind of trying to design your team dynamic to best deliver. And so anyways, it could be a whole other session, I would say, Amanda, on that. So yeah, exactly. Rapid prototyping is another piece of it. So oftentimes we've actually seen this with one of our clients, Jerry, is that they actually separate out this rapid prototyping piece before there's an approval, or there might be another stage gate after that before going into a more traditional or way, like once they've actually proven things out. So every team is a little bit different. Every organization is a little bit different. Every product or project is a little bit different. And while Agile came from software for sure, it has far-reaching implications, and we've seen it successful, not just in a software place. So anyway, sorry, Jason, to interject, but that was a great question, Amanda.
No, fantastic. And you said a word that resonated with me, and the word is bang. So when I think about this, requirements, design, development, testing, deployment, bang, you get your big thing. That is the big outcome at the end. Whereas Agile, we work through something, bang. We work through something, bang. We work through something, bang. And this cumulative outcomes, those essentially culminate in that big bang that we would see from Waterfall. So thanks for that, Molly.
Hey, Jason.
Yo.
Just another comment. This is Rick. So I've got experience with Waterfall mainly, but there's always, every project I've been on, there are changes, right? And there's iterations,
Sure.
which kind of like Agile, but I guess the difference, and I don't have experience with Agile software development, but I guess the difference is for Waterfall, it's not usually a plan change, right? So then it's a change management topic. If there's a requirements change or a problem, as opposed to Agile, it seems like you're designing that iterations into the plan to begin with. Is that a good way of thinking about it?
I think so. You're definitely on the right track, Rick. If I were to draw a line, can everybody see my mouse here? So
it's kind of like the house metaphor. Something, the homeowner partway through says, "Oh, I want a golf simulator room," and I didn't think of that before, right? So
yeah, at some point it's going to be too late, and you can't put your cool golf room in there.
Right.
So another way that I think about this, when we look at it here, when we start at requirements, the risk curve starts really low because that's when we're figuring out our requirements. But the risk curve goes cumulatively ever higher all the way up through deployment, because we're really, staking our claim and that we're going to deliver this one thing. If we go over to the Agile way of doing things, while it can take a lot longer, there can be a lot more effort, like Molly said, the risk curve is very different. So we'll have like, risks within each sprint. And then there's also, a risk curve that goes throughout the whole project, but it's much less acute than you would have with a waterfall project, because you do have opportunities to slide in that cool golf room halfway through the project because you're working more iteratively.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Makes sense.
You got it. Cool. The golf room. Love it. I want one of those. All right. Life cycle. You know what? I'm just going to skip this one because I think we just beat this one to death a little bit. Projects fail. So, projects fail. They just do. So what failure actually means can get, it can get a bit philosophical. The numbers regarding just how many projects succeed versus fail are as wide as reasons for that perceived failure. One relatively recent stat that I found had respondents of a PMI survey, I think it was in 2022, reporting that 12% of projects in their organizations were deemed failures in the past year. But that begs the question, what constitutes a failure? I would argue that just like success, it's ultimately in the eye of the beholder. Let's get that guy out of there. So a few reasons that I reckon we can all agree contribute to a project ultimately being considered a failure include, but certainly aren't limited to, lack of strategic alignment. What's the priority? Missing unclear or subjective requirements. Lack of visibility throughout the project lifecycle. What's the status? How are we tracking against that end goal? Which dovetails into transparency or lack thereof. So what happened? How did we miss that? And then, of course, lack of ownership or accountability. We know things need to be done, but who owns it? It seems kind of obvious, but it's very real, I assure you. Triple constraint. All right, we're going to get down and dirty here. Amanda, how are we doing on time?
We're doing great, Jason. Yeah, keep it going. It's 1:23 right now.
Awesome. All right, triple constraint. If you've heard of this, raise your hands. I can't see you. Doesn't matter. In the project management world, there's a general understanding that a project is typically bound or constrained by three static elements. Well, static, no, they're dynamic. Which, just like everyone else in the PM world, are open to interpretation. So behold, the triple constraint theory, or theory of constraints, if you like, affectionately referred to by PMI as the iron triangle. So if you're taking the PMP exam, the iron triangle represents budget, scope, and schedule, which is also scope, time, and budget, which is also scope, schedule, and cost. Or in terms of things that most people can relate to, good, fast, and cheap. Any way you serve it up, we're essentially measuring the same things. You can have it good and fast, but it's not going to be cheap. You can have it good and cheap, but it's not going to be fast. You get the idea. In an ideal world, all aspects of the triangle would remain in line and we'd march off to end goal nirvana without any concessions. But in reality, each angle or side of the iron triangle will expand or contract based on scenarios that are most often out of our control. So if the schedule moves up, we'll need to either increase the budget to get more resources on board or decrease the scope in order to meet the deadline with the same budget. So in essence, the triple constraint theory helps you recognize competing demands in every project. So for each one, you need to decide which demand is the most important. So knowing which aspect is the most important makes it easier for you to make those adjustments and to balance the other two and keep the project on track. To make things even more interesting, and I seriously doubt this will come as a surprise to anybody, every stakeholder has their own idea about what's most important in the project. The triple constraint theory gives everybody involved a better understanding and, the give and take relationship amongst, the different aspects of that triangle. This makes it easier for you and your team to adjust and adapt to changes when they come up, as long as everybody's relatively aware of those competing sides. So what are the best ways to navigate this stuff? Feel free to chime in. I'd say stick to the plan. Easier said than done. Know your priorities. Add and document your constraints, and communicate, and then communicate some more. Any additions to that, guy? Cool. All right, governance. Well, good project governance can be a powerful weapon for a project-based organization, or even a non-project-based organization, as long as they have some governance policies and hierarchical steps, that they follow. A key element of good project governance addresses how decisions, rights, accountabilities, all those things are disseminated and assigned between everyone who has any stake in the project's outcome. Think about a PMO or a project management office. That would be a good example. Any other examples out there? Questions? Elaborations? Awesome. All right. PMP, what is it? Who cares? PMP is a project management professional certification doled out by the Project Management Institute. I would say that, so what's the value? Increasingly, customers are demanding that PMP certifications are held by their vendors. I would say it speaks to your profession without them actually knowing you, that perhaps you speak a common language. And it shows that you're motivated and goal-oriented, I guess, because, it's, make no mistake, the exam's tough, but you need to put in a lot of work to pass it. That said, some, if not the best PMs I know on this planet, don't have the certification. So really, it's a feather in your hat. Anything on PMP or any other certifications? Questions?
Jason, I've got a question about PMP, and thanks for indulging my questions today also, because this is great learning for me as well. The thing that I've wondered about the PMP and the just like being a part of this kind of institute in general, do you get access to resources that are like specifically available through that certification if you have it? Like, are there kind of those incentives where getting that certification gives you access to different things that might be useful in your work? So that's one question. There's another question coming in from Jerry that's also, what is involved in that process? Is it a long process? You mentioned the exam is pretty tough, but can you walk us through that process as well?
For sure. Thanks, Amanda. So for the first question, there are different resources that are available to you as a PMP, because I would say as a PMP, you're probably a paying member of the Project Management Institute. You pay your monthly dues and you're part of an organization, just like anything else, like SHRM. But you don't have to be a PMP to join these organizations. And if you join them, then you have access to them. There are some great white papers and case studies that they do offer. So, I mean, there is some good access to resources. In terms of the second question had to do with the effort involved in chasing the PMP certification?
Just the process, like what's involved in getting that certification.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's an application that you have to fill out before they'll allow you to take the PMP certification or the exam. And I think, I don't remember right now, but there's a certain amount of hours that you have to account for as a project manager.
3,500. So about
Thank you.
3,500 hours as being a project manager or being a project team member, and there's different levels associated with that. So you actually have to like say, I worked on these projects as a project manager for a certain period of time as part of that. And so it's not just the test, it's that application that Jason's talking about, a certain number of hours in a certain different type of role, as well as other things. But Jason, you're absolutely right, which is joining your local chapter will get you access, or the national chapter will get you access to a lot of the same templates and things like that, Amanda, that we have access to. And there's a lot of activities that the PMI and other organizations put on that have things that are called PDUs that go towards that Project Management Institute license. And those you don't need a certification in order to participate in those classes and those courses. And now with COVID, a lot of those things are virtual. Jason, I think you were actually the president of our local chapter. And during COVID, when we were dealing with that, moving away from that in person to network. And so to me, by making it online, a lot of these classes and recordings are a lot more accessible now, which is at least one pro from the COVID experience.
I got one more question for you all, if you don't mind, which is just, that's really helpful. And are there prerequisites for taking the certification? Like you mentioned, there's an application and that there's a certain number of hours that you need to have in certain types of projects. Like, are there prerequisites? Could anybody do this? So let's speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, anybody can do it. So I think we chimed on this in the beginning, but everything in project management is and should be open to interpretation. So, for instance, when you're accounting for your hours in the project management profession, Molly, thank you, 3,500 is what they're looking for. And it sounds like a daunting number, but think about what you do. And let's think about, like, remember the definition of a project. It's something that you do that's delivering, a unique product or service with a definitive beginning and end. Everybody does this stuff all the time. I mean, there is an audit process that these applications go through, but yes, it is readily available to anybody that is interested in chasing that PMP certification.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. All right, and we are way ahead of schedule, which I always like. The last slide that I have of any sort of substance is just this jargon. I didn't pull out anything in particular, but are there any words that we've gone through today, jargon, nomenclature, that we'd like to go back and review, or maybe a new one that we want to talk about a bit?
Can we talk just a little bit about project sponsor versus project manager, Jason, and how that plays into project management as a discipline?
For sure. So a project manager is in charge of, managing the project, whereas the project sponsor ultimately has the responsibility of that project's success. So think about if you are implementing a new HCM or human capital management system for an HR firm, your sponsor would probably be somewhere along the realm of, director or VP of human resources. And the project manager would be facilitating or orchestrating the work having to do to deliver that end result. What do you think, Molly? Anything to add?
Yeah, I think oftentimes the sponsor, when you say accountable, like it has oftentimes fiduciary responsibility in terms of like it might be coming from their budget. They might be reporting out to executive leadership or to senior leadership and be kind of a point of escalation when you're trying to get buy-in across multiple different potentially, business units or teams. Sometimes one of the big pain points, I think, as a project manager is oftentimes we're not the manager, the HR manager of the team members. And oftentimes in real life, project team members have full-time jobs in addition to working on a project. And so that constant push and pull between operational responsibilities and commitments on projects, making sure that that project manager has that good relationship with the sponsor, that the sponsor is fully bought in, and that the sponsor is in a position in the organization that it can be effective to escalate to if we're losing traction. And just that relationship between that sponsor and the project management manager, and how transparent that relationship can be in terms of risk, raising risks and issues, and taking them seriously. I just think it's a key indicator on whether a project will be successful and whether or not it really will not just get to the finish line, but be successful and add value and return on investment for that organization long term. So I think that as a project manager, that sponsor role is really critical. And in some cases in organizations, especially smaller ones, you're playing both hats in some cases, where you're both the project sponsor and need to kind of push that mission and the value of the project, and you're managing it. And there's not necessarily a separate person playing that project manager role, but recognizing the roles and responsibilities of both hats that exist, and what roles that plays. So sorry, I went on a little bit too long, but does that make sense, Jason? I think that's in line with what you said.
No, totally, totally. And that word fiduciary responsibility that you use. So to me also a project sponsor, if there's anybody that's going to be reporting back to the, the board of directors on the any sort of successes or failures, is probably going to be that sponsor.
Prince2 SAFe certification, Scrum Master, Fred, that's a great question. And I think that I'll refer back to Jason's initial comment, which is speaking a common language. And I think of certification as kind of that fast track to showing that you have experience because someone else has kind of verified that experience. So I don't personally think that the certification makes you a good project manager or product manager. I think that experience and proving that you've been through a really hard project and failure and everything like that is a better indicator for me. But as a consultant or as someone looking to expand your career in project or program management, those certifications do act as verification of your skill set and experience. At least in quantity, if not always quality. Is that a fair enough answer in terms of Prince2 certification? Yes, Prince2 is pretty well known and is an easy Google search away. So it's definitely worth it. If I was choosing which one, I would say that the PMI organization is the best known internationally, like global organization, and is dominant in the US in terms of certification path.
Spot on. We got anything else, Amanda? I think we are at the
that was the
close
last question
of
in the chat. Yeah, so we've got like another 5 minutes booked. So if anybody else has questions about things or wants to chime in about anything in this webinar or not, definitely I would say, Jason, if you have that 5 minutes still on your calendar that we've reserved, we can open it up, kind of open up the floor. That goes for Molly and anybody else who's in the meeting. And if you are dropping off, thanks for joining, and we'll follow up with the recording.